Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday. Talking gaming stuff today. Yay, I try to make sure Tuesday is at least a gaming video. And we're talking remakes today. The terminology between remaster and remake has sort of slid. Traditionally, my understanding is that a remaster is just updating the graphics and the performance and the sort of underlying guts of the game. Whereas a remake is actually retelling the story or presenting it a different way or updating the combat, so on and so forth. But there's been talks for a while now about an original Last of Us remake that got fresh steam because of a hat Neil Druckmann wore in an interview with Tom Holland about the Uncharted movie. Why Neil Druckmann is there for the damn Uncharted movie, I don't know, but that is just so typical. Sorry, I'm uploading something while recording this. Just so typical of this guy that he just has to insert himself into everything. And I use that term in a cheeky way. If you like this sort of commentary, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, because I take shit every time I voice an opinion on something like this. People don't stop and listen to my reasons for the opinion. They're like, you don't like what I like, dislike. It's irritating in a minor way. Like one of those itches that you get this time of year with like a polyester sweater. Yeah. But, remake usually means some sort of meaningful change. We all know what happened with the Final Fantasy VII remake with some tweaks to the plot that I'm not good with, but that's a subjective opinion and I'm not going to bother with it. That's the sort of thing of I don't like it. I'm not going to say it's a mistake. But Final Fantasy VII came out quite some time ago. The Last of Us came out in like 2013. If they're just, going over the mocap and beefing it up for 4K, true 4K, awesome. Though I don't know how many people are gonna buy that game again just for 4K. Apparently, the original plan Sony had was to bundle it with Last of Us 2. I guess the Left Behind DLC is just getting left out, or that's going to be part of I don't know. It's like Left Behind has become left behind in this whole freaking saga. Maybe they'll bundle it into the Last of Us 1 remake. I don't know. I don't care. Maybe they're doing this as part of the HBO whatever it is series. I want to talk about remakes in general. And I want to talk about when they work and when they don't work. Remakes are always fraught, right? I mean, there was the joke in, what was the show? Big Shot, the John Stamos girls basketball Disney Plus series. They had an all-female Macbeth named Beth Macbeth. And we all do that stupid shit in school when you're a theater/literature major and recognize there aren't a ton of parts for certain types of people. So you're like, we're going to redo it with a twist. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. I've seen modernizations of Hamlet and the Scottish play that kind of work, but they're divisive, right? Because no, it's set in this period. Do it right. And the argument for reimaginings of Shakespeare are that these stories are so timeless that they are just as relevant to today as they were when Shakespeare wrote them. Therefore, you can do, say, a production of Hamlet in modern day business suits and have it still work. Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. But that's the idea. And that is the thing about a remake. If you've got a compelling reason to remake something, awesome. If you don't, it's just a cash grab or a do-over, and neither, I would argue, is right artistically. When you are in media, when you are a creator for long enough, you realize nothing is ever truly finished. You just run out of time. And at some point, you have to say, this is what it is. This is what I managed to do with the time and resources I have. Put it out. The original Star Wars is a shining example of George Lucas couldn't get the rights to Flash Gordon, so he came up with something that was a pastiche of Westerns and Kurosawa films and Flash Gordon and a bunch of other things, and cultural history was made, right? There was a modestness to the original Star Wars. The actual modesty, not the cover up or else use of the term. The idea that it was sort of humble and was only trying to be what it was. What I like about the Mandalorian shows is they're going back to that. This is a fun 1 hour popcorn experience. This is not trying to be some sort of cultural touch point, because my attitude is whenever you try to be a cultural touch point, you will not be. Those things happen by accident. All you can do as a creator is make something you hope people are going to like. You can't control what culture is going to do with it. And that is part of what I think some of the problem with the Star Wars movies are, and even modern day Trek, that they're trying to be big instead of trying to just be Star Wars and Star Trek. And most sci-fi nowadays, it's like this unified theory of science fiction. Everything's running together. It's like Mass Effect borrowed from so many things, and now so many places are borrowing from Mass Effect that everything looks and sounds the same. The two exceptions that I have experienced with that, maybe three. Dark Matter tried to do something different. Orphan Black, Killjoys for sure had some interesting new ideas, and then The Expanse. Those are the four sci-fi series that, yes, I still saw. A lot of those were shot in Toronto, full disclosure, and I saw a lot of Mass Effect on the costume department's murder boards. On, if you don't know what a murder board is, it's like a collage. But saw a lot. Pretty much every sci-fi thing, now you walk in and you see a Quarian in the wardrobe department because those suits were just so freaking cool. But yeah, those shows did things that were interesting and different, and it didn't always work, but at least they tried, right? And they were just trying to be cool sci-fi series that did something a little different. Resident Alien, it's a comedy, but it's trying to do something different. Doom Patrol is just trying to do something different. They are not trying to be groundbreaking science fiction. I hate that freaking term. And this is the problem with the Last of Us franchise and Final Fantasy. And when the original Last of Us came out, when the original Final Fantasy came out, Final Fantasy VII was just like, we're going to make a game that we hope people like. Right? Okay, granted, the Final Fantasy franchise was already building. You know, Final Fantasy VI has a lot of clout in its own way, Final Fantasy VI in the West. But Final Fantasy VII really shook the trees in terms of storytelling. And I get what they're doing with the remake is they're like, everybody already knows the story, so we're going to try to make it new in some ways. I get that. I respect that for a new generation of players. I'm gonna sit back and just have my original Final Fantasy VII with all that cool kind of Shinto messaging that came with it. But The Last of Us also, it was sort of this game. Everyone's like, what is it? Like, what the heck is it? No one was quite. It was Naughty Dog. It looked really pretty. Naughty Dog was riding high on. I don't remember if that was after Uncharted 3 or Uncharted 2, but Uncharted, everybody loved Uncharted thanks to Amy Hennig's writing, among other things, and the fact that they were just gorgeous games. And Last of Us kind of came out. It was this game that dropped in like May that year. And so nothing else was out. It was a weird time to release a game, right? Right before E3. And there was nothing else to play. And everybody went, oh my God, this game is great. Now, was it perfect? No. There were a lot of object clipping in the original Last of Us. That was the thing. I'm like, I reviewed that game. I'm like, I can't give it a perfect score because there's just too many times Joel like punches things and ends up inside a table and I get stuck and I have to reload a checkpoint. But the story was interesting and poignant and, yes, dreary, but also sort of affirmed the human condition in a very real way because it was a story about two people, right? In a really harsh world that made choices, and you could not just interact with the game, but interact with those choices. And the characters were super well developed, in part, I believe, because of the actors' involvement. And there was something really special. There was a spark in the character of Ellie. Ashley Johnson voiced her, right? I think it was a lot of her performance and what she brought to the table with it that really made Ellie come alive. And that was why we sort of understood, even if we didn't agree with what Joel did at the end of the original Last of Us. And like I said, was the gameplay all that great? No, I mean, once it became a full-blown action game, it was action horror, all right, fine. The stealth in the early levels was if I had to choose between like just the straight up gameplay between Uncharted and The Last of Us for what it was, well, I'd go with Uncharted because that's just a straight up action adventure game, right? Whereas whereas Last of Us tried to do the stealth horror, and they kind of throw that out a third to midway through, and okay, it's an action horror game with a really great story. That's what it was. And really cool graphics and good performances, and it was what it was. And then it became this cultural phenomenon. And now games have to mean something. And certainly Ellie lost her spark. But like the whole franchise, the Left Behind DLC still had some of it, but even that was starting to feel like you're kind of slipping into this sort of Life is Strange, Gone Home thing, guys. Run your own race. And then The Last of Us 2 came out, and it was just like, what is this? All the dreariness was still there, and it tried to hit the same beats, but you can't hit the same emotional beats with the same storytelling beats. You have to tell the story in a different way, and succeed or fail. You can't just reinvent the wheel, but with more and different characters and expect it to click the same way. Like, oh, it's a zebra instead of a giraffe. The problem is everybody has ripped off that damn giraffe scene now. It's the problem that a lot of really innovative, especially visually innovative science fiction has, that everybody swipes it and therefore it no longer seems original. And that's my concern with the Last of Us TV series is that everybody's done the fucking giraffe now. Fuck, 911, you know, the Angela Bassett show? Even they did a fucking giraffe in an urban setting. Everybody's done the fucking giraffe from The Last of Us. So they can't do the giraffe anymore and have that same, oh, whoa, that's a moment, right? That is the problem when you truly innovate. It happened to Blade Runner. It happened to certainly Star Wars. Mass Effect, it doesn't, there was talk that there was going to be a movie or some sort of show for a while there with Mass Effect. It seems like that's not going forward. But again, the problem with Mass Effect is Mass Effect borrowed from so many things, right? It borrowed from Dune. It borrowed from Star Wars. It borrowed from Star Trek. It borrowed from a bunch of freaking things. That's what BioWare does. Just borrows and recombines them and spits out something, you know, syncretic. The problem is, then everybody stole from it, like I said. And so now if you try to make a Mass Effect spinoff, everybody's already picked that corpse clean, right? And this is the problem with genre stuff. It's the same struggle Lord of the Rings has. It's the same struggle, you know, even Star Trek. I mean, what is a definitive Star Trek story anymore? Right? And so this is what happens when you become groundbreaking. And that's what happened with The Last of Us, is it started taking itself far, far too seriously. Getting back to the idea of a remake, right? The problem with going back to the well, like the Star Wars special editions, or like when Spielberg took the guns out of the scientists' hands and put flashlights in there, you know, all that stuff. You're now too close to it. You're not a creator creating in a vacuum and hoping people like it anymore. You're somebody going back and mucking with what you did, with the weight of the cultural the cultural phenomenon that it was. And that pollutes the work. Especially when you're going back and remaking a game that's not even 10 years old. If it's just a 4K remaster with maybe an improved multiplayer and, you know, the Last of Us DLC kind of woven into it instead. If that's all they do, if they like patch it together with like flashbacks or some shit like that, I don't even know if that'll work. But if that's all they're doing, all right, fine. But remakes suggest they're adding something. They're changing something. And there's certain things you just don't remake. Right? You don't remake Casablanca. It was a movie at a very particular time with very particular things going on in the world. I mean, I was even very hesitant about anything to do with Watchmen. And those weren't remakes. They're not, well, they made a movie of Watchmen that I thought was not good. So I know people who liked it. That's fine. I'm just super close to the graphic novel, and I think television, serialized storytelling is the way to do it. And I very much liked the HBO Watchmen series for what it was, but it was a continuation, not a remake. Because the original Watchmen is so steeped in the Cold War that I don't know how you'd remake that today. Like, there was just so much with Vietnam and with the Reagan era and all that stuff. I don't know how you'd have to totally tear it apart. And at that point, tell a new story in the spirit of Watchmen, right? Even Doom Patrol now, the way they've had to tweak it so that, you know, Larry Trainor's backstory and all his internalized guilt makes sense. It takes a lot. And that's the thing when you're remaking something. Unless you've got an incredible idea that captures the why of the, you know, original stuff, the way, you know, The Mandalorian sort of, especially the first couple seasons, really did capture that original feeling of episode 4 in Star Wars, because it was simple and it was small and it was just space western. It was a space opera. Like, that's all it was. It was borrowing from Western tropes with a little bit of the samurai stories and that interplay through Kurosawa. That's what Star Wars was. That's what it was. And they figured it out. But now The Mandalorian is a thing and everybody's fighting over it. And when the cultural weight of something becomes so heavy, remakes become a problem. Look at the Peter Jackson King Kong and how people dumped all over that. And I thought the Peter Jackson King Kong was an absolutely wonderful companion to the previous, King Kong movies. And I don't think people really got it, because how many people had seen the 1930s Kong movie? Nerd. Right? They were aware of it. They had this nostalgia for it, but the problem with nostalgia is everyone remembers in a different way. And the mind starts filling in things that aren't there. And now we all know what happens to Ellie in The Last of Us 2. Going back, we're not going to see it in the same way. The sparkle's gone. And I understand Sony's idea. They did the same thing where they remade the original Ratchet and Clank when the Ratchet and Clank movie came out. That didn't do so hot. But then, Insomniac turned around and put out a badass Spider-Man game. So yay, Insomniac. Walked away from that one. I've said for a while I don't think the Uncharted movie is going to be terribly good. I will see it because Tom Holland, but I have very low expectations for it because it just seems everything involving Naughty Dog takes itself just too seriously. And the spirit of those Uncharted games was those old adventure serials that Raiders of the Lost Ark was based on. It has a pedigree. It has a thing. But it's groundbreaking video games. Now, no, it's not. It's a fun adventure. It's a fun adventure story with absolutely top-notch graphics that showed what the PS3 and then the PS4 could do. And that's why if The Last of Us remake just makes really, really shiny 4K, I'm still not going to replay it, but I'm still sad. I'll wait for the next God of War game to come out, and go, okay, that's going to be super shiny for me. That's going to be my shiny PS5 experience. Because we're at the point where people just cannot discern the extra graphics fidelity. HDR and the PS5 controller and the reduced load times are all more compelling reasons to get a PS5 than 4K. A lot of people think 4K is super important. For the majority, 4K is important, but for most people, they are not at the correct viewing distance from their screen, and their monitors are not properly calibrated, and so they're not getting the most out of 4K. They like the idea of 4K, but it's just taking up more space on their hard drive. I say this as somebody with, I get those Sony TVs and I go, whoa, on HDR mode. And the only downside to streaming games is I don't get to play them in HDR mode because HDR color is so pretty on an HDR compliant monitor. So pretty. Can you tell? So pretty. But do we need a Last of Us remake? No. Is there any benefit to a Last of Us remake? No. Remakes are just hot right now. And I mean, if they went back and, dug into maybe that old Sega Master System catalog and did an Altered Beast remake or a Phantasy Star remake, I'd be all over that. But okay, those games were from the late 80s, right? It isn't Chris Pratt in a fucking Mario movie. We're hitting that point in gaming where gaming is maturing as an industry. And with it, we're getting the remake problem. Like Hollywood, remaking Charlie's Angels, remaking Hawaii Five-0, remaking. I like the Magnum remake. I liked the MacGyver remake for what it was, but I really like the Magnum remake. But it is just the cast. Same thing that made the first show work. It was a really likable cast. They found a really likable cast for this one. But is there any real inviolate tangible details about a private detective operating in Hawaii? Well, the Ferrari and the Dobermans, and then the absolutely unrealistic lifestyle for a private detective that they explain with the whole Robin Masters thing. That's Magnum. You know, Tom Selleck's on Blue Bloods now, so we're all like, all right. I still am hoping that Tom Selleck will come back as Robin Masters in the finale of the Magnum PI remake. But when I first heard about the remake, I'm like, they're remaking Magnum? Seriously? The bar is so high to have a remake that's really great that you have to have an absolutely fantastic idea to make it work. And I just don't see a compelling reason for a lot of these remakes. You know, the exception is Demon's Souls, because the original was so jank, right? And yeah, let's go back to that. A lot of people didn't play that game, right? So there's a whole audience with a game that wasn't what the whole Dark Souls thing is now, right? And it was something that was an exclusive when the PS5 in the early days. All right, that makes sense to me, right? But The Last of Us sold a ton of copies. So many people have played that game, right? It hasn't been enough time, nor was it enough of a sleeper phenomenon. Not like the original Alan Wake, right? Which should have done better than it did. But I think it was because it was such an anomaly on the Xbox that it didn't. And it wasn't that they didn't try to market it. It was just this, you know, oh, if you like Stephen King and David Lynch, it was almost like 10 years too early to really find an audience. But you guys know I love that game and I'm super excited for the sequel. But it's a sequel. It's not Alan Wake the remake. I mean, yeah, they backdoored it with the Control DLC, which is the only reason I played Control. And I admit I suffered through the main game and didn't like it much because I just wanted Alan Wake, which is probably more about me and less about the game. But there is a place for remakes. But the industry's getting greedy. Probably because the Halo and Gears remakes sold like hotcakes. However, there was a reason to remake, say, for instance, the original Gears of War. And that was because they needed to teach a whole new studio when they opened up the coalition. They had to teach them how to make a Gears game. And a remaster of the original game with the DLC levels, like the Brumac fight and stuff like that, put in was a good way to do that. They learned by doing. Okay, we're gonna recreate levels and all that stuff. Oh, this is how a Gears map works. Okay, that made sense. They recouped the cost of training through a remaster that people enjoyed. Similar with a lot of the Halo stuff, right? Made sense. And also, I mean, the original Halo Combat Evolved was like, oh my god, this is so cool at the time. But you look back at it now, it's like, whoa, I didn't remember it looking that rough. Same if they remade GoldenEye. I'd be totally awesome sauce with that. Though I don't know how well that would hold up. But the graphics just are dated, right? Those Polygon era graphics, like when they made Tomb Raider Anniversary, there was a reason to do that. It played much better. They took all the gameplay improvements, went back, told the original story. But again, that was a new studio coming on, getting their feet wet. That makes sense. That isn't the case with Last of Us. And so I hope this is just Naughty Dog being naughty douche and not a greater industry trend of let's just throw out remakes so we can pull money out of the same pot, because gamers are good little consumers and like to support franchises that gave them good feels. I don't think there's the same good feels left with lots of us, but you know what I mean, right? You know what I mean. Really interesting to your feedback about this video. This was just sort of free ranging, talking about games, open concept, kind of water cooler talk. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.